Good evening to everyone here in person and our Zoom participants. Everybody's very excited about a great lecture tonight that we have, Land Stewardship for Birds and the Importance of Native Communities. If you're not here in person, you're missing out. The authors are here and their book's available and actually signing it. So everyone who's here who wishes to purchase actually got a signed copy of the field guide, which is really neat. We appreciate that. Okay, so to continue our series of local native plant drought survivors, I apologize for the bar on top, but the library has redone their AV system, and as a result of that, we have to kind of go through the web in a different way we used to, so the bar will just kind of have to ignore that it's there. There's not too much we can do about that. Argarita is our plant of the day. It's a 3 to 6 foot tall shrub with holly-like foliage and with sharp tips. A friend of mine who has land and trying to get rid of the shrub called it agravita because of the thorns and things of that nature. I have it on my property as well, but they're extremely drought tolerant. They're very, very pretty. As you can see, there's yellow flowers February through April, and then you have berries. So it really is very good for birds, especially, for feeding on that. Very low water. I know on my property, it got 0 irrigation this whole summer and looked as fine as it does now when it's been getting rain. So it really is very, very tough. Tolerates dry, rocky, sandy, well-drained soil that we have here. And it is really, quite deer resistant. Again, I guess they view it as Agarita too versus Argarita because of the thorns. So something to think about when we have our plant sales. We do sometimes have this available as well as a shrub. So just something to keep in mind when you're looking for drought resistant and redoing your landscape. We have upcoming speakers and meetings. Jessica Woods is going to be speaking on water conservation in March. Just note the change. We're going to be at the Round Rock Public Library. For those of you who haven't been there, they've just redone it. We're in the new building, plenty of parking, and a lovely facility. April 11th, we're going to have All About Seeds. Beth Irwin is the presenter. This is kind of a follow-up from the earlier presentation we had regarding seeds, and this is going to be more practical approach to kind of what is it that you're going to do with the seeds and how to get them propagated and start your native plants. May 9th, we have Susan Reynolds, archaeology and ethnobotany. Should be very interesting talk. And, for these two, we'll be back here at the Georgetown Library. We're going to be kind of switching back and forth to different places. So please be careful and look at the blog before you jump in your car and wind up in the wrong place. So field trips coming up. We have a really great schedule for the field trips. March, if you're already a member of the field trip committee, there's going to be a plant sign survey and maintenance. So the committee will be busy doing that in March. March 17th for St. Patrick's Day, we have the spring tree walk at Old Settlers Park, and Gary Barrows will be leading that as well. We're continuing our Hidden Springs Plant Survey. This is number 10 on April 12th. We have Museo Benini in Marble Falls, and the Chrysler family has been extremely nice to allow us to actually take a field trip to their family property. So that's something that you definitely don't want to miss. That'll be on April 27th. And then May 18th, we have the Critchfield Conservation Preserve in Gerald. So that'll be on May 18th. There's more. I ran out of space on my slide. Very active committee doing a lot. They're still looking, to kind of enlarge the committee and bring new members in. It really, they do a lot of interesting things, and there's a lot of expertise on that committee. So I encourage anyone who's interested to, try it out. And you can contact us on the blog and just send a note and it'll get to the right person and we'll get back to you. Just as the last field trip, here's on January 20th. As you see, this is a very cold-hardy committee who showed up there. And these are just some of the things that they found while they were doing that. And they gave a heads up that in the spring, it's going to be really, really nice as far as our wildflowers are going. So that's another thing to think about if there's when the next survey comes up. You may want to think about joining them on that survey because it'll be, quite nice as we get into the spring. We still have more to do, taking over 4 years again. And this is a part of what we do to document native plants and part of our mission, to help move the identification and the preservation of space. Another field trip, like I said, they're a busy group of people, was at Twin Creeks Historic Park, and that was in February. They had a great time, and this is actually in Cedar Park, really not that far, and, kind of where it is, so you could see. And again, they had a very productive trip, and it was really quite scenic. Project. So this was the group of volunteers that came to the Georgetown Public Library Native Plant Garden, and they cleaned it up and got it ready for spring. So we want to thank all of our members who volunteer for these particular projects. If you would like to volunteer for particular projects, we have some that are coming up. We're working with Rock to actually rejuvenate their native plant garden and a partnership there. So that's already started. We also have our pollinator garden workday at Williamson County Landfill in the spring that we'll be doing. And we have our in-person plant sale on May 6, 2024. April 6th, I'm sorry. I was flying in today, so I think I'm still on another time zone. So feel free to just shout out and correct me. I'm good with that. European style, yeah. So the other thing I wanted to say is that we actually have a sign-up sheet that's here today in the back table for the plant sale. So anyone who would like to volunteer, you can sign up there, or you can go to look at our blogs. There'll be blogs posted and where to sign, or on the website. So these are, some of the volunteer activities. And if you just want to kind of say, I'd like to volunteer for something and fill out the contact form and send it to us, we'll get it to the right person to kind of direct you to where we can use you as a resource. So we got a lot of things coming up in the spring. We're going to be at the Georgetown Conservation event that's coming up. We have a couple of Earth Day events that we're going to be having, booths and plant giveaways. So if anybody's interested in participating in that, just let us know. Nancy Pumphrey, who coordinates our volunteers, is here tonight. Nancy, you want to raise your hand so you know who she is if you want to talk to her? So again, just you can go to the website, use the contact form, and we will get you to where you need to be. So a lot of interesting things to do and get out. So here's the grand announcement. Our plant sale will be an in-person plant sale, not like the one we had in fall, which was just pre-order and then pick up. This one will be an in-person. We may have some online pickup for certain heavy shrubs. You need to just watch our blog and you'll see kind of what we're doing. It's in the same place that we had it last year, Champion Park, Brushy Creek, and Cedar Park. So we're looking forward to that. And the availability list will be posted before the sale so that you can kind of, look at that. Our plant committee is busy visiting nurseries and kind of getting our, wrangling what we need for the sale. So more to come on that, but very exciting. We're getting out of winter and into spring. So another thing that we have now is it's a limited time offer for Nipsot garden signs. We did not design this. This is a promotion by the state to promote native plants, as well as to acknowledge your membership in the Native Plant Society of Texas. So on our website, if you go on there, you can order it online. We have the two signs. They come in English as well as Spanish. They're roughly $19. We're kind of giving it to you on a preview online sale because the state will be selling them, but they will be $25. So if you want that for $19, you can go on our website. We have our store and you can pay for it online. The pickup will be at the plant sale or that April meeting. So we will not be mailing the signs to you. So if you order online, it's either the plant sale pickup or at our April meeting. So if you're interested, you can go there. The sale ends on the 13th of February because we need to get our order into the state right after that by the 15th. And then the state is going to place the order for all the different chapters. So we thought that we would offer this to you. I believe it just went up about a week or so ago, and I think we have like 20 signs that people, have already purchased. So if you're interested, just go to the website and see what you have. But it's $19 all in, and that's kind of what we're doing. So for those of you who are attending in person, another benefit of coming to see us face to face, those of you online, you can just be jealous because you're not getting these. So we have 3 plants that are in the back: Hinckley's columbine, cedar sage, and fall aster. So if you want to stop and pick something up on your way out here, please do. It looks to me like so far there's a few left in the back. So, please take advantage of that. Another thing that those of you online can just look at and be jealous of, but you can order the book online, is the person who's here for our raffle is going to win the field guide from our author's talk tonight. And that will also be autographed for them to take home as well, which is kind of very nice. And it's a great field guide. So that's another benefit of being here. Again, as I mentioned before, make sure you look to see, where we're meeting before you come. And we do Zoom. Some of our meetings are recorded, some aren't. That's always posted on the blog as well, so that whether you can do it through Zoom or if you need to be here in person or both. So I'd like to introduce Rufus Stephens and Jan Wrede. Rufus is a certified wildlife biologist, and Jan is an environmental educator and author. And they have a very long history and a lot of expertise that if I would go through their whole dossier, we would be here for 45 minutes and you'd only hear 15 minutes of their talk. But they're quite well regarded, and we're so happy to have you guys here, especially in person. That's always exciting. And I want to just turn it over to you and continue on.
Thank you very much, Susan. We're really happy to be here. And I need you to tell me if I'm speaking loud enough.
You might need to speak just a little louder for the group in here.
Okay. Okay. He has a big voice, so you'll hear him without any problem. He's the talker. I'm the writer and he's the talker. So you'll see in a minute. But I have a bit of introduction to do. First of all, we were just talking, Rufus and I have been working together for about 30 years. And we're pretty good work partners because our skill sets match and or complement each other. And we really started by working with landowners, helping them improve their properties for wildlife. And we discovered shortly that birds are the charismatic species. Birds are pretty easy to manage for. Everybody loves them and they're everywhere. And once you manage for birds, you have helped everything else. So that's sort of the beginning. We work with many large landowners and small landowners. We discovered that your backyard is just as important as the 100 acres across the road. What everyone does contributes. Now let's see if I can work this thing. Good. Uh-oh.
That'll have to stay, unfortunately.
Okay. All right. So we're going to ask you to make a shift, perhaps, in your usual thinking about native plants. I have noticed, I'm a member of the Native Plant Society and have been for many years, and I noticed that there is an emphasis on individual species. We get our favorite species and we propagate them and plant them and love them. As wildlife biologists, as those who manage for wildlife, manage land for wildlife, we're interested in something much bigger. We're interested in the habitat, or the whole community of plants. That's much bigger thinking. And this is what we're inviting you to join us in looking at the world this way. We're going to introduce you to a couple of major habitats in this area, and then give you a chance to learn through some practice to recognize both healthy and unhealthy. So, our books. That's what I was supposed to start with, our books. Okay. Yeah, that's right. We really came here to sell books. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So this is my book that I wrote a long time ago. A number of people.
That's okay. You can keep going.
Okay. A number of people have come up to me and told me they use it. I use it. I use it all the time because I'm old and I forget things. And it's in here if you need it. And then Rufus and I discovered that after working with really many hundreds of landowners, they wanted more than our workshops. They wanted, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hold it in front of this pen.
Okay.
So
Thank you. Yes, thank you. So the landowners told us that they wanted more. So we decided to write a pamphlet. The pamphlet turned into 500 pages. Yeah, it's the truth. So yeah, please buy our book. We would love it. We think the book will actually help you. And that's why we wrote it. It's a passion for us. But tonight, what we want to do is prepare you to recognize these habitats, both healthy and unhealthy. And we're going to focus on two. One is the live oak savanna, and the other is the grassland. And because these are the two major habitats, the major plant communities in this area. Live oak savanna is probably what you call canyonlands a lot. We're hoping that you will learn from our presentation to recognize healthy and unhealthy. And it could ruin the enjoyment that you have driving down the road now. Because you're going to start seeing a lot of unhealthy habitat. That's unfortunate. Rufus told me his wife doesn't like riding with him anymore because that's all she can see is unhealthy habitat. Okay, and we're hoping that our passion will inspire you to desire to become advocates and to improve the native plant habitat communities and bird habitat on your property. So we want to make you activists. Yeah, I think you already are, probably. Okay, now is this going to work? Do you know how to do it now? Okay. I think we can. Okay, we didn't point out that was healthy habitat.
Oh,
I forgot to say that. Yeah, this is super healthy canyonland or
back up maybe one. Oh, there it is. It took a second.
Yeah. So look at that big mess of plants, all the kinds of diversity. Diversity is the key word here. When you're talking about plant communities, native plant communities, and health, it's the greatest diversity that is there. It's makes it more stable, healthier, and better for birds and other wildlife as well. Okay.
Yep.
There you go. Thanks.
Thank you, Jan. So, so what I'm going to talk about is actually what we'll go over tonight is basically an overview of land stewardship. We'll talk about birds as indicators for success. That's really what we're talking about. We'll talk about some examples of habitat and bird requirements. We'll also talk about, as Jan mentioned, that a little bit on healthy and unhealthy habitat. And we'll sort of finish by talking a little bit about land stewardship techniques, and we'll see how much time we have left. We might even talk specifically about one of those. So what is stewardship? And so basically stewardship from the dictionary, from Google, right, is that it's the careful and responsible management of something in one's care. And when we're talking about land stewardship, it's just the careful and responsible management of land that's entrusted to one's care. And landowners, private landowners, and Texas is a private land state. Almost, 96% of Texas is in private hands. It's not public land, not like in the West. So what private landowners do makes a huge difference, okay? So we want you to be better land stewards, right? And land stewards for birds. And there's Gary and Adams. So why birds? And Jan started to talk about this. Basically, birds are charismatic, right? People love whales and elephants, but locally, I mean, how many people, does anybody not like painted bunnies, right? I mean, it's kind of like saying, do you not like kids? So, and Jan mentioned birds represent diversity, and basically, in a real, in a very significant way. And we're talking about not only the different types of habitat, but the layers of habitat. So there's birds that use the top of the canopy. There's birds that use real close to the ground. So all that diversity, when you start managing for birds, they can help. Or by using them as the focus for your land management, they help you manage for diversity. So, and as Jan mentioned, that when birds flourish, all other types of wildlife do as well. And they really can benefit from habitat management. So you do something to improve your bird habitat, the birds will flourish. And there's some interesting, and I may touch on that, there's some interesting data on that, even from landscapes, from people's homes. And when we get to backyards, we may talk about that. There was actually a study done in San Antonio in a wildscape development. It's pretty interesting. But one of the things that we realized, we knew that birds were in trouble when we were writing the book. And we knew that from breeding bird surveys and such as that. Well, there was a paper that was written and came out in 2019 in Science. And that one basically took a lot of that data and other data as well, and basically was pointing out that we've lost a third of all bird species in North America in the last abundance since the 1970s. And so, that's a significant loss, 3 billion birds since that time. And this is actually from that paper. And the one thing to kind of take away is that birds have declined in all major American biomes. And, not only grasslands, which are the most in peril. And when we talk about how much blackland prairie is left in Texas, right, there's a fraction of a percent left of blackland prairie. And so that's not surprising. But it is surprising that all these others, and especially things like birds that are habitat generalists, that means that they are really adaptable, and they've declined. The only exception is wetland birds. And the reason for that is that in the 60s, duck populations fell. And we had a bunch of organizations like Ducks Unlimited got together, and they also did some legislation called the North American Waterfowl Management Plan, and they put money to it, and they saved wetlands in the prairie pothole country, and they saved wetlands in the panhandle and the Texas coast, and it turned around the waterfowl population. So we can do it. That's the good news in this kind of depressing story, is that we can do something about it. Like I said, who doesn't love painted bunnies, right? And this is the painted bunny is, the painted bunny is really a Texas bird. This is basically for the United States where the painted bunnies breed. And so Texas, Oklahoma, that's the heart of their area, and really Texas is. So this is a Texas bird. And when you look at the population, this is statewide data from breeding bird surveys. They've had a pretty significant decline. This is about a third of the painted bunny populations have declined. Jan was going, so what's the red lines? So it's just basically because this is from breeding bird surveys and it's scientific data, is they're giving us the upper and lower. This is the confidence intervals, right? So 95% confidence intervals for all the statisticians that are out there, right? And so it's the upper and lower 95 percentile. So they're sure that it's somewhere between those two red lines, and it doesn't matter. It's still a significant decline, right? So
We have a pointer.
yeah,
Top button. Yeah, there you go.
so but so that's kind of depressing, right? But one of the other things I talked about landowners, and we asked about wildlife tax valuation. And what that is people that have acreage and they have an ag valuation can convert that to a wildlife valuation. So instead of managing just for agricultural crops, primarily livestock in this area or agricultural crops, they can switch and manage for wildlife. And so, and get the same tax advantage that you would for ag land. And so actually the numbers are just coming out for so it's done every 5 years, but they're just finishing the data this year in 2024. So for 22, but it's going to be more. And so 5 million acres in Texas is specifically being managed from an agricultural perspective for wildlife. So that's an optimistic thing. I mean, that's something we can make a difference out there. That's almost more than the public land we have in Texas. Okay, so it's a lot of land. So what are the steps to stewardship for birds? First is to identify the habitats that you have, the plant communities you have. What are those different types? If you've got more than an acre, then you possibly have more than one habitat type. And what's the quality? And so how do you determine quality is kind of a challenge, right? And so what is the quality? And then what you do is you select 2 or 3 species for each habitat type and pick them so that they represent different types of food sources or different types of layers of habitat. So you don't want to pick a Buick's wren and a Carolina wren. They both use the same kind of habitat. They're both insect eaters, although picking an insect eater is a good idea. But picking a bird that uses a higher level in the canopy rather than just 2 that have the basically same type of habitat requirements. Then you determine the practices that you need to do to benefit that bird. And that's what our book was about. I mean, was that data was hard to get in the past. And you had to go out to many different sources to get that. And when we used to teach classes to landowners, we said, well, you go to this resource for that, and you go to this resource for this. And, that was difficult. And they were like, why don't you write a book on that? And So that's, that information is what we gathered together in ours. Ours is not a field guide. It's not a plant guide. It's not a plant field guide. It's not a bird guide. It's a land management, a land stewardship guide. That's what we have. As Jan says, be prepared to be your own best advisor. And look and listen, ask lots of questions, keep learning. You're here tonight, right? I think that everybody's here a lifelong learner. Find trusted advisors. And Jan will say, well, Rufus, you were one of you were my trusted advisor. And so find those people. Some folks were talking about Ricky Lennox earlier. Super resource. I mean, if you can get his ear, I mean, that's a great resource. Steve Nally, amazing guy, right? And make science-based decisions. Okay. So one of the things also is that a lot of land stewardship problems revolve around a few things, and these were important enough that we took these and added these as specific chapters in our book. Although there's lots of other things that relate to poor land stewardship or to degraded habitat and such as that. But we talk about predators and other dangerous animals. We have a chapter on that, and red imported fire ants, or RIFA. So you'll see that acronym just rather than writing out red imported fire ants. Deer management. Anybody have problem with deer? No. And then cedar and brush management. And that's actually one of the things people were asking about. What we expanded from the previous edition. One of the things was we increased our discussion on brush management. Here are some of those species that we were talking about. The red imported fire ant. House cats kill about 2 to 4 billion birds a year. Now, you go, wait a minute, isn't that how many birds that had declined since the 70s? Well, when we're talking about that, that's adult populations, so the population that diminished by that much. A lot of the birds that cats are getting are part of that population in a year that would be lost to other sources, be other food sources for other, things like Cooper's hawks and such as that. But cats are killing more wildlife. There's a study done in Ohio where they looked at in a rural community, and feral cats, house cats also, were killing more wildlife than all other mammalian predators combined. Now that should bother you, but it's important to be to be a responsible pet owner. Spay and neuter your pets. Keep cats inside. If you really want them to go outside, build a catio. And if you want to Google that, feral hogs, brown-headed cowbirds. I won't go into. I mean, does anybody have any hog problems? A few people, yeah. And feral hogs all the way across the state are a huge problem. It's estimated that we have as many feral hogs in the state as we do white-tailed deer. And we have entirely too many white-tailed deer. And brown-headed cowbirds is kind of a specific situation. And maybe if y'all want to talk about that, well, we can talk about that later. But it's what's called an obligate brood parasite. And all it ever does is lay its eggs in somebody else's nest. Never lays its own, never takes care of its own young. So this is actually done by some master naturalists. Any master naturalists out there? Yeah, I helped start the Master Naturalist program in '96 in San Antonio. And this is from Joey Fisher-Hines. She is a Master Naturalist in the San Antonio chapter, and she did this painting to basically represent that idea of the loss of so many birds to house cats and feral cats. So So she's talking 4 billion in one. That's the upper end of the estimate. 2 to 4 billion is basically what they look at per year. So can you recognize, native plant communities? These are bird habitat. Basically, that's where they get the things that they need: food, water, shelter, and space. And to start, Jan mentioned that we were going to look at a couple different habitat types. One is grassland, and one of the birds that we focus on our book is one of our priority species is the lesser goldfinch. Anybody have lesser goldfinches? Yeah, I see that most people in the audience do. They have lesser goldfinches. And they are on a priority bird list. They've declined significantly, even though we see them. There is a biologist that I know, and he always said, what we really want to do is keep common birds common, right? We don't want to get till they're endangered species and go, oh, now we need to take care of them. No, we need to do that before. We need to be aware of those declines and try to turn that around. So some of the things they really need: good plant diversity, insect diversity. Just to mention a couple of the practices that are beneficial: prescribed burning, mowing and baling, but prescribed burning. And I'm going to go ahead and share I did a prairie bird survey. I was doing a prairie bird survey this morning and just outside of Bernie on a piece of property. And we've been doing prairie bird surveys there for 20 years. And basically we march through a field with 3 people and flush the birds, and we count the number of sparrows, wintering sparrows that we see. And we do that. We've been doing that for 20 years, and we do it we did this season, we've done 15 different surveys or 15 different transects in December, January, and February, same piece of property. And all these transects were laid out in fields that had not had much management practice. They don't have any grazing. If you just looked at the grass, you would go, wow, that looks great. And we had one field that we got a chance to burn last year. So we're almost right in burning. And so we burned 20 acres last year, and it's right next to one of the fields that we do a bird survey in. In those surveys that we've done this winter, we've only counted 6 sparrows in all those surveys. We did one pass through the burn field, and we counted 14 birds of 3 different species types. So if that doesn't tell you how important that kind of land management is to those birds, it's just really significant. It reinforced to me exactly that was important, but it was really kind of a shock to some other folks that maybe weren't as aware of it, and kind of looking at those fields, it looked like they were fine. But so burning is really important. Light to moderate rotational grazing, and from a livestock operation standpoint, rotational grazing is really important. Oh, excuse me.
You mentioned that this is all in the book.
Yeah, it is all in the book. And more. And actually, that is one of our birds, and actually what we call bird summaries. That's just some of the information that's in one of the bird summaries. So this is healthy grassland habitat. You can see just the coloration and the grass that's out there, that there's different grass species out there, right? And so that's healthy habitat. It could be better. You actually can see some forbs. Anybody got Mexican hat? Lots of there. You can see the Mexican hat. Of course, is in the foreground, it's easier to see the wildflowers that are in there. But there's a lot of other species in that field. Forbs, wildflowers. So biologists call them forbs, broadleaf flowering plants. And this would be unhealthy habitat. That is a field that's almost solid KR bluestem. And so low diversity, low grass diversity, low forb diversity. So that's really unhealthy. And of course, as Jan said, my wife really, she used to say, she said, I used to be able to drive along just in bliss. And now it's like, oh, and especially with me, it's like I'm going, look at that, that's terrible. So some of the species that we might find in a grassland, this is just some of them, right? Grasses, some of our native grasses, big blue stem, green spangle top, forbs like black Samson, that's the echinacea, right? Gay feather, penstemons, those, but that's just a smattering. So, you know, the number of plants that grow in a healthy grassland, hundreds, you know. So this is just a smattering of them. So the other community that we were talking about, live oak savanna, and this one you can see there's a lot of diversity in that habitat picture. This is great painted bunting habitat. Painted buntings are also a priority bird, as we already mentioned. They're in decline. They've declined by 30% in Texas. They nest 3 to 5 feet off the ground. So, you know, 3, my knees, to about, you know, shoulder height. So, and the reason, so one of the things to do for them is to control deer population. And why is that? Because they nest 3 to 5 feet off the ground. So if you think about a browse line from deer, if you don't have a good shrub layer, you don't have good painted bunting habitat. And so is our you know, the decline in painted buntings also related to, you know, high deer populations? That's probably one of the problems that we have associated with that. So that's an example. So there's our healthy live oak savanna, kind of similar to the picture that Jan showed. Lots of understory, lots of layers. So there's painted bunting habitat, there's wren habitat there, there's even, you know, yellow-bill cuckoo habitat in there, which are going to use higher level. You can see grasses, you know, that are there in pretty good structure. Yeah, exactly. You might see milkweed right there. So it's great diversity. So this one, you know, it's surprising. On the way over, Jan and I saw a number of properties that looked like this. I mean, worse. They were just rock, right? They didn't even have any ground cover. But looking at that habitat, you can see there's no understory, right? There's no shrub layer in that habitat. It also is like one species, right? It's live oak, right? There's nothing else. In this one, a red bud right there inside that kind of oak motte. So, you know, there's a lot of diversity in that one. This is shin oak right here. And that's the way shin oak's supposed to look. It's supposed to look like a plum thicket, not a single trunk tree, right? Deer make it that way. So, but also goats can make it that way, and that's part of the problem in this unhealthy habitat. It doesn't show the goats in there, but they're goats in that's part of the problem in that habitat type. So, you know, what are some of the plants that should be in this? Actually, we're talking about agarita. And agarita, and you think of Texas persimmon, agarita, which are good wildlife plants. Why are they so abundant? Well, it's because livestock don't like them. And you overgraze a place, for 100 years. You may not be the most recent landowner on it, but those plants persist where others don't. And also, deer don't really eat them. They don't like them. They're low quality forage for them. So those plants end up dominating a plant community, and that's a sign, long-term sign of being unhealthy. So what plants would be find in a backyard habitat? My version is tongue in cheek. It's only St. Augustine and live oaks. And I can't tell you how many times I've had landowners who call me up and go, "Hey, I bought 20 acres and I'd like to get you to come out. I got some people out and got out all that brush, and now I want to talk to you about habitat." And I'm just like, oh. But in a backyard, I mean, we look at that, but just thinking about it, and but we know, right? A backyard can be much more diverse than that, right? And it doesn't. Now, I'm a wildlife biologist, and my neighbors think I'm kind of nuts, right? And they go, "Oh, look at the wildlife biologist." I mean, I've let snags grow in my yard. I've had trees that have fallen down, and I let them rot because I want, the diversity that's occurring there. And they just think I'm crazy. But it can be a more formal landscape. Again, diversity that's there, layers that are there. That's really important. And I'll mention here. So there was the study done on what's called the preserve down in San Antonio. It was a development that was done. It was the first certified wildscape development in Texas, right north of the airport, across from McAllister Park. And a graduate student went in there and basically looked at that as a habitat type to see what kind of bird diversity it had there. They looked at and what was it to be compared to was typical St. Augustine and live oak yards. I mean, right across the street, there were, typical homes that were mainly St. Augustine, a few trees. And then they looked at Government Canyon, and that was their control. That was the native habitat that they were using. The wildscape development, which had lots of native plants in it, that they preserved a lot of that native plant community there as they built the homes, had significantly more diversity than the traditional backyards. So there's been local research that's been done that shows that. It is much more like that's in native habitat. And some of the birds that are specifically there are insect eaters. That's a huge percentage of our birds, right? They don't all eat seeds at our feeder, right? It's insect eaters. So that's the big difference. So some of the things, make sure that you're planting plants that provide seeds and insects. And of course, one of the things that means if you're providing seeds, it's got to be a dried flower, right? It's got to go dormant to be able to provide that. If you're going to plant a sunflower that's going to provide seed for birds, for lesser goldfinches, it needs to, go be completely dried, and they're going to pick the seeds out of it, right? And that's where my neighbors kind of think. And but keep your feeders clean, right? How many people have bird feeders? A lot of bird diseases associated with bird feeders. A couple of years ago, we had a lot of birds that died associated with disease spread that was happening in bird feeders. So keep them clean. That information's in our book as well. So buy the book. Keep cats indoors. If you didn't kind of get from earlier that's really important. One of our species, and so you go, oh, you mean the anybody not have black-crested titmice? Yeah, so they are really ubiquitous, right? But they have declined. and they're also a bird that we're concerned about. One of the things is almost all the population of black-crested titmice is in central Texas. So what we do impacts this species, okay? So the steps to land stewardship was to identify your habitat types, the different habitat types, the quality of those, and we talked a little bit about healthy and unhealthy. Select some species, bird species, 2 or 3, doesn't have to be every bird that you can possibly count out there. Pick those birds and then look at the habitat types they need and use them to determine what stewardship practices you need to provide. So we talked about, land stewardship, what it was. We talked about why birds as indicators for success. We talked about some basic habitat types and bird requirements. And some of the land stewardship techniques that are in the book and that we could talk a little bit about if we had time. We have a little bit of time? So, yeah, anybody? So actually, each one of these is a link that I can go to, and so we can talk about. I've got several slides associated with each one of these. Is there something specific that kind of brush control? Okay. Let me get over there. Brush control. So, anybody not have cedar? So, but I'll talk a little bit that also touches on mesquite, okay? Because some people have mesquite problems. So some of the things about cedar management, one is old growth cedar is important. Its habitat, especially on steep slopes. Steve Nelly talks about that it may be the most stable plant community on some steep slopes, right? That we shouldn't be trying to grow grass on steep slopes, that maybe cedar is the most stable plant community. And it's often a part of healthy plant community. I think of it as birds' winter coat. How many evergreen plants do we have out there, native, that will provide that? Evergreen sumac, agarita, but cedar. So, I mean, I've got cedar trees in my yard. And so, but when I go out in the wintertime, when we get one of those big cold blasts and it goes down to 10 degrees, you go out and look in a cedar tree at night and you'll see birds huddled in there. Okay. So it's part of the healthy plant community. It's escape or protective cover. That's kind of what I was talking about, but it's always good cover for them. Lots of birds eat the cedar berries. These included cedar waxwings, robins, woodhouse's scrub jay. So have a plan before you start clearing. Don't call me afterwards and say, I've cleared all the cedar and gotten rid of everything but the live oaks, and now we want some habitats. Don't use a bulldozer. Okay. Select the right tools for the job. I see it. It's not coming up.
Folks online see it too. It's just slow.
Oh, okay. Let me see if I can. Nope, I'm going forward and it's not. There it goes. So select the right tool. I don't think many people still use axes, but a chainsaw is a version of that. This is a tree shear right here. That's a stump bucket. I'll talk about that in just a second. But what's the right job? What's the right tool for the job? This is a Fisker, right? It's a limbing saw, but it's great for trimming, getting those little cedars. Okay, your cedar looks like this. That's not the right tool for the job. So something like a tree shear, and the reason that we talk about tree shears is like a giant lopper, right, on the front of a skid steer. And in this picture right here, you can see. Here are a couple of stumps they removed, but there are other vegetation and trees and plant community that was left behind. Okay, this was cleared and there was no grass planted. Okay, and actually, you see the cut stumps. It was actually a demonstration we were doing with landowners, and there was some of it that was done with a tree shear. We did some of it with by hand. And so we did a bunch of different practices, just showing landowners how to, the different things you can do. And there is, you can see a lot of little blue stem there. There's blue grama or hairy grama. There's actually in this area came up was Indian grass. So, and it was in a seed bank. It was already there. You couldn't see it. It looked like this. Okay. Oops, y'all can't see that. I'll go for it. There, it looked like this. It looked like this, right? It looked like it only had cedar sedge down there, but it had more. So a lot of those plants are there. You don't necessarily have to plant them. Hydroax. I used to think, that's pretty indiscriminate. And this is a site that I was familiar with. And actually within 5 years, I always thought it put too much mulch on the ground. But this site afterwards really looked good. But if it's in front of a hydroax, it's toast, right? So anything it comes across is going to be clobbered. Mesquite, that's me. And so that's pretty big mesquite. Actually, that's where I was doing some of those prairie bird surveys this morning. And so one of the things you can use is stump bucket or a tree grubber, and they basically both work the same way to control mesquite. And you have to get the mesquite out of the ground, disconnected from the root system, and you have to get that collar that's just underneath, as growing buds, just underneath the soil surface. If you cut it off at the soil surface, it just gets pissed off and comes back with a vengeance. So they both work basically the same way. It's just a little bit of a different tool that does the same thing. What do you do with cedar slash? You can put it on the slope and help catch soil that's often bare right after you've done some cedar work. So put it down perpendicular to the slope. You can make teepee brush piles like this. And basically what that's doing is it's creating some shrub habitat before you even have shrubs, right? You make some teepee brush piles out of it. It's like, what do you do with all that cedar? Because when you cut it down, it multiplies. Large exclosures. Anybody familiar with Bob Webster? He's a radio personality in San Antonio. Well, Bob Webster did this. He has a nursery, Shades of Green, down in San Antonio. A big organic guy. He's made these large exclosures, basically using the cedar to create a fence around the outside to keep the deer out. And it is surprising. There is tremendous amount of diversity that's happened in this. You can see shin oak coming back in here, lots of little blue stem, lots of forbs. There's lots of plants that we were surprised that even showed up. There's just another example of it. Bob surveying his work. He said it's his exercise program. So, one of the things is also as a conservation gardener, use deer exclosures to protect your native plants. And so anybody use exclosures? Does anybody use exclosures? So, and it's like, do it so that it's more attractive. You can buy some material that makes it more attractive these days so that you can keep the deer off of it. So that's one of the challenges with, around deer. So what we talked about was that old growth cedar is important, especially on steep slopes. It's part of the healthy plant community. It provides important scape cover and protected cover and is food for wildlife. But have a plan before you clear. So we're going to end there. I'm going to go back. And I do want to ask any questions, but I also want to go ahead and say that I dedicate my presentations to my brother Ben, who's got the fish. And he passed away several years ago from ALS. You remember the bucket challenge? Get to ALS. ALS is horrible. Lou Gehrig's disease is the other name for it. Basically just, his body basically gave up on him, but his brain was still, it was terrible. But And then I lost my son, and that's who I dedicate the book to. Actually, don't write a book to make money. We don't make any money at it. But actually, all of the money that I make goes to a fund for conservation work in Northwest Arkansas, where I spent my summers playing and learning about, and getting my passion for native plants and wildlife habitat. And so did I shared it with my son, and he did too. But so I dedicate it to them. But we'll back up. So questions? Any questions online?
Not online.
Yeah.
Can you just speak a little bit about cowbirds?
Yeah, so cowbirds are an obligate brood parasite, and they are so a couple things that are kind of interesting. One is they look for other birds that are nesting, but they also just look at nests. So don't remove old nests. Actually, you can't but people do it. But leaving those old nests out there is important, because then that just means that's that many more places they have to search before they find a nest that they will parasitize. What they'll do is they'll go, and there's some really insidious things about them. So one is that cowbirds have the shortest gestation period of any songbird that they're breeding, that they are parasitizing. So when they lay their eggs, they often hatch first. Their chicks have a wider gape than almost any other bird. And what a mother bird does is she feeds the widest gape, right? It's survival of the fittest. This is my healthiest chick. I need to feed that chick. And it's the cowbird chick. They will actually pull eggs out. They'll pull baby chicks out. And one of the things is we also used to call them buffalo birds. That was the other name for them, buffalo birds. And they followed migrating herds of buffalo around, and they needed to keep following the buffalo in order to get to feed. And so it was a great survival strategy to be able to parasitize a bird as you go along, and they raise your young, and you keep following what creates your food source, the buffalo, right? Well, then Europeans come along. We put up fences and we put cattle everywhere. Cowbirds are no longer, and so also as they follow those migratory herds, they may not be back. The buffalo may not be back to that same location for several years. So even if birds were parasitized, they weren't parasitized every year. European settlers came. We put up fences. We put livestock everywhere. We bear responsibility to the cowbird problem we created, right? And now they parasitize birds everywhere. Black-cap vireos were significantly impacted. Golden cheek warblers is one of the problems there. The reason they started doing it was because of Kirtland's warbler, which almost blinked out. And that was one of the things I realized that was going to be part of the strategy for saving that bird. It's the worst thing I do as a wildlife biologist, but I also realize that it's really important. And so I do it, and on the property that I help manage, we do brown-headed cowbird trapping. That said, if you don't want to do that, I absolutely understand that. But one of the things is, like woodlands, if you have a woodland, cowbirds are edge species. If you have a good woodland, make sure that the interior stays closed up. If you open up the middle of that woodland, you basically open it up for parasitism by brown-headed cowbirds. So there are ways that you manage that habitat without controlling the bird that impacts how the bird parasitizes other birds. So it's, and we could go on, but it's.
So if you open a woodland, haven't you created a savanna?
So if you open a woodland, haven't you created a savanna? So if it was historically a savanna, absolutely, that may be the thing to do. But just recognizing that savannas are also much more susceptible to brown-headed cowbird parasitism. And I wouldn't do that. I mean, if it was historically a post oak savanna or a live oak savanna, There's no reason not to go ahead and manage it that way. But if you think of like steep slopes and, canyon situations in the hill country, those are places. Also, grasslands. So if you have a real extensive grassland, that's, Blackland Prairie, and the trees are way over there, then those grassland birds are not going to get parasitized like those that are near the fence or near where the trees are. They'll be parasitized more. So it works both ways. But a savanna is that's prime cowbird.
So do the cowbirds, you were talking about layers, do they do like the 3 to 5 foot layer, or do they do the standard layer?
Yeah, she asked whether the question was, do they parasitize a certain layer? So are they only hitting 3 to 5 feet, or are they doing everything from the top of the canopy to ground level? Pretty much everything from the top of the canopy, ground level. Painted or summer tanagers are a high canopy bird, and they are highly parasitized by brown-headed cowbirds. So it's about 230 species of birds that are parasitized by brown-headed cowbirds. So other questions?
Just curious, so suburban habitat is edge habitat, just kind of by definition. Does that promote cowbird kind of nesting?
Oh, that's a good question. So cowbird populations don't tend to be very high in urban settings. I spent 10 years as an urban wildlife biologist in San Antonio. That's when I did the Master Naturalist program. But you're right. By definition, it's edge habitat. And so if you think of a savanna habitat, if you think of your backyard as savanna habitat, that's probably pretty accurate. Although, if you're on the east side, east of 35, it might be better to think about, especially if you don't have many trees right now, that might be pretty cool grassland habitat, and thinking about, perennials and grass. But yeah, but they're not as prolific in urban areas. And it depends on what's around you as to whether there are cowbirds there. Anybody seen cowbirds at their bird feeders? Or I live right in Bernie. Of course, Bernie's pretty small, but I live right in Bernie, and I've seen cardinals, chicks, or cardinals raising cowbird chicks at my bird feeder. So I don't do cowbird control at my feeder. That might be a little bit too much for my neighbors, but I have done it. Yeah. So I apologize. The question was about whether urban habitats are more, a problem from a cowbird standpoint. One other question. So we'll just do one. Yeah. So, well, one of the things is, it's interesting. So mesquite, controlling mesquite. Actually, seeds are more viable going through a deer than they are going through a cow, which kind of tells you, oh, darn, that's helping spread it around. It will tend it lowers the diversity pretty dramatically. You get a certain kind of shade around mesquite, and so what we tend to get is, as if you let it go, is that it becomes mesquite wintergrass habitat. So speargrass, Texas wintergrass, it loves living under mesquite. And so, up in sort of the north central part of the state, they have whole fields that are mesquite and Texas wintergrass, and they are dying to get some diversity in there. Little blue stem is cratered out in those fields, so they want to add diversity, and so it means controlling the mesquite and then trying to get some other plant communities, some other native grasses going in there. So low diversity is the long-term problem with mesquite.
Because they get one question, all of the Zoom. There's something.
Yeah, we have several questions, so what I'll do is I'll package these up and give
Yes.
them to you guys and get a response, and I'll include that
We have
when
time,
we do the
don't we?
post. But I do want to ask this one question here, because it's very, I guess, pertinent. If you live in a typical urban, suburban lot, what would be your top 3 things that you would say to do to make an impact?
So that, and again, it's kind of what Jan was talking about and sort of the large scale aspect of it. And so if you, when I used to teach wildscaping classes, which basically is managing backyards as wildlife habitat, is that the corners of your yard, the only thing that sees the corners of your yard is your mower, right? So that's a perfect place to take and start creating, perennial beds and shrubs. You don't need to see the corner of your fence. And so that is, so adding those layers of habitat, but also figuring out where that goes in your landscape. So in trying to increase that diversity. So we really appreciate you all coming tonight and sticking with us. Yeah.
Okay, I want to thank those of you on Zoom. Please check in on our website, and you can look to find their book online if you're not here, if you're interested in purchasing that. Okay, so have a good night.